so hard. Now everything is easy 'cause of you. Let me tell you how it will be. There's one for you, 19 for me. 'Cause I'm the tax man.
The Homestead Act was a private member's bill introduced by Tim Hudak, a progressive conservative MPP. The Homestead Act deals with the assessment of the values of houses. Why? Well, because under the current laws of Ontario, there's this property taxation system. They tax you because you own a house, or they tax you through the rent that you pay to your landlord because they tax your landlord, and he just passes on the bill to you as part of your rent. So the way property taxes work is that your local municipality sets a tax rate, basically a percentage or a multiplier, and that's the overall rate for real estate in your kind of housing or your kind of accommodation. So for example, there's sort of the single family dwelling rate, there's the multi-residential rate for apartment buildings, which tends to be much higher, in fact as much as double the single family occupancy rate. The rate set by the municipality, that's called the mill rate, M-I-L-L, mill rate. That mill rate is only one element of how they figure out what your tax bill is going to be. Another thing they have to do is determine what is the value of each of the units that they're taxing. So let's just deal with single family dwellings for the sake of simplicity. Within your area, within your municipality, they're going to look at the values of all of the houses in the municipality, the single family dwellings. And they're going to assess those on some mysterious methodology. They'll never come out and actually look at your house. They won't actually come inside and see what improvements you've done or anything else. Let's just say that MPAC, MPAC is the short form for the organization. It's a government body that is responsible for placing a value on each home. Effectively what they do in each municipality to determine how much each homeowner is going to pay is they determine the relative value of your house as compared to every other house. If other houses are going up in value and your house is not going up in value, then what will happen is that other people's taxes will go up and yours will go down. Alternatively, maybe other people's houses don't increase in value, but yours decreases in value for some reason. Again, your tax burden will go down, their tax burden will go up. At least it'll be higher than it otherwise would have been. But now imagine a municipality with only 2 homes. Imagine that the city, for 10 years in a row, didn't bother changing the mill rate. Okay? And imagine that on year 1 of those 10 years, when the mill rate's going to stay the same, on year 1 they evaluated all of the homes in town, and there were only 2 homes. And all of the homes in town were evaluated, and the price came out at $300,000. So both of the homes in the town were $300,000 in deemed value. And in that situation, the mill rate would be applied to each home's value, and it would turn out, of course, that each of the homeowners would pay the same amount of tax. Now imagine the next year they did another property value assessment. I'm not sure that it happens that quickly, but let's just say they did. And imagine that, again, as I said, the mill rate has not changed and will not change for the next 9 years now. And so, but what has happened is that one of the homeowners has improved the value of their house. They've perhaps added a number of things that increase the value of the home. And so now that house is worth $600,000 and the other one's still only worth $300,000. Well, now the guy who's being who owns the house that's $300,000 in value, his property tax bill is going to go down from the year before, when the other guy had a house the same value as his own. His property values are the same, but his tax bill is going to go down because his next door neighbor had a house that went from $300,000 up to $600,000. Now that guy who now owns a $600,000 house because he made improvements to it, that guy's tax bill goes up. So if you want to think of it this way, if your home increases in value relative to other houses, your share of the tax burden is going to go up, and everyone else's share of the tax burden is going to go down. It's a fixed pie as long as the mill rate isn't changing. If you don't change the mill rate, the size of the pie is exactly the same, and it's only a question of what size your slice is, how much of the tax you have to pay. And the bigger the value of your house relative to other people, the bigger the chunk of the pie that you're going to have to pay, the bigger the chunk of the tax burden that you're going to have to support to pay. Now, the Homestead Act is a private member's bill introduced by a progressive conservative MPP named Tim Hudak. If it were made a law, the Homestead Act would impose a 5% cap on the assessed value of a house for the purposes of determining how much the house owner should be paying for property taxes. So let's deal with the example again of a town with 2 houses in it, only 2 houses in it, and each house has a fair market value of $300,000. And let's assume that the mill rate imposed by the town is not going to increase for the next 10 years. Let's just say that's going to be the case. And now assume that homeowner A is going to keep his house unchanged for that whole 10 years. So this house, and let's just say that that's a house that for the next 10 years will always be worth $300,000. Now assume that the other house in town is going to be improved in value every year, that the homeowner is going to continue putting things into it, and that each year the home is going to increase by, let's pick a ridiculously high number, not because it's ridiculous, but because it's easy to do the math with. Let's say that the house is going to increase in value 100% every year. So it's going to increase by $300,000 every single year for the next 10 years. Now, under the Homestead Act, even though the actual value of the house is going to increase by $300,000 per year for that second homeowner, that other homeowner, even though the real value of his house is increasing by $300,000 per year, the Homestead Act says, don't take that into account. Let's just say that his home is only increased by 5% per year. No matter how much it goes up, cap it at 5%. If it comes up less than that, well, that's fine. Whatever's less. But otherwise, if it goes up more than 5%, we're going to pretend that it didn't. We're going to pretend that the house only went up in value by 5%. So after 1 year, home A is still worth $300,000, and home B is now worth $600,000. But the Homestead Act says, let's pretend that it's only worth $315,000 this year. So at the end of the first year, house A is worth $300,000 and house B is worth $600,000, but the Homestead Act would pretend that house B is only worth $315,000 and would tax each person according to the value assessed by the MPAC people using that twisted formula that says home B is only worth $315,000 when it's actually worth $600,000. So at the end of the 9th year, we've had 9 increases of $300,000 for home B, and so the total value at the end of the 9th year is $3 million. And meanwhile, home A, well, it's only worth $300,000 because it hasn't been increasing in value. Hasn't been decreasing in value, but hasn't been increasing in value. So now home B is worth 10 times as much as home A. Now, let's just say, for the sake of simplicity, because I don't have a calculator with me, that at the end of the 9th year, the MPAC people would say that it's increased by, let's just say it's increased by $15,000 9 times. Okay? So there's been $135,000 of increase. So at the end of 9 years, home B's deemed value is only $435,000, but its actual value is $3 million. So for property tax purposes, MPAC is saying that that $3 million house is only worth $435,000, and it's saying that the first house, House A, is worth $300,000. And no doubt, over this 9 years, property owner B, the person who owns property B, has had to pay an increasing share of the property tax burden, no question. But he hasn't had to pay anything near a share based on the actual value of the property he owns. He's been cut some slack. And who's picked up the difference? Well, of course, the owner of property A, who should have seen his property taxes going down each year as property B was increasing in value. So you could say, oh, well, you know, if your house is increasing in value, the Homestead Act is great. It cut you some slack. But if your house is not increasing in value, or if it's decreasing in value, the Homestead Act messes you over. It messes you over if other houses in town are increasing in value and yours is not. But let's look beyond that problem. Let's just look at, it's the end of the 9th year. You've got a house that has a real value of $3 million and a house that has a real value of $300,000. Now there's this fella out of town, and he owns a $3 million house too. And just like property owner B, he's owned it for 9 years. And just like property owner B, he's only had a $15,000 increase each year for the last 9 years. And so his deemed value, again, by MPAC under the Homestead Act, is only $435,000, even though the real market value of his house is $3 million. So you've got two people owning a house worth $3 million. Person B owns a house worth $3 million. Person C from out of town, he owns a house out of town worth $3 million. And he's thinking about whether or not he should sell his house and move into the same town as person A. However, he's got to think, under the Homestead Act, as soon as he sells his house, that 5% per annum cap disappears. And whoever buys his house has to get taxed at the full market value. So, instead of treating that house as a house worth only $435,000, the person who buys it will be taxed on that house as though it's worth the full $3 million. And so if he sells his house out of town, person C, he sells his house out of town to buy person B's house in town, so it's going to cost him the same amount of money. It's a $3 million house he's selling and a $3 million house he's buying. He will find that his tax burden goes up because the deemed value on the new house that he buys will no longer be $435,000, but $3 million. So you got to ask yourself, is person C from out of town going to sell his house to buy another house at the same value in town, when it means that his property tax burden is suddenly going to shoot up through the roof because the full value of his home is suddenly going to be recognized for the purposes of property taxation? Of course he's not going to want to sell. The Homestead Act would effectively create a situation where people are afraid to sell their homes and buy another home of the same value because they'd lose the benefit of years of capped property assessment increases. And if property values are increasing, and there's only so much land, so property values tend to increase over time. If property values are increasing sufficiently, they're actually going to suffer a higher tax burden if they sell their house and buy a new one. Now, it's not every case that'll happen to, that'll happen in, but it will happen enough that it will change buying and selling behavior. If you're selling a $3 million house surrounded by $300,000 houses, to buy a $3 million house surrounded by $300,000 houses, you're probably not going to sell the first house to buy the next one. In fact, you probably won't buy the next one at all. But if you do, in all likelihood, you're going to hold on to the first house, and then you're going to lease it out to somebody. Because effectively, it's a price-controlled rent, isn't it? The person would be renting a $3 million house, but the property taxes on that house, for the purposes of the landlord, are only based on a $435,000 value, and so the rents for that $3 million house would be lower than otherwise they would be with the higher tax burden. And so you'd have all of these grandfathered properties that people were holding on to and turning into rental properties simply so they could pay the tax on the the new house they buy. So the Homestead Act is a complete government centralized interference with the market system. It's an assault on the price system. Effectively, it undermines supply and demand. It undermines free market forces in the buying and selling of houses, the building of houses, and creates a distortion. Why? Well, so that people don't have to pay extraordinarily high rates of tax on exceptionally expensive houses. Well, aren't we really sort of missing the point here? Isn't the real issue not how quickly we increase people's taxes? I mean, that's all the Homestead Act does. It slows the rate at which your tax burden grows. All right? It puts the brakes on, but not bringing you to a full stop. It just slows it down. The tax rate still keeps going up if the value of your house is higher. So, is this really a solution, or is this just a stopgap? I think it's just a stopgap. But there's no way to fix property taxation.
And you'll